Hey guys, it's Mike Madrid, author of the Latino Century. Check out the new audiobook version of my forthcoming book, read by Lee Osorio. It's going to be available June 18th, coming from Simon & Schuster Audiobooks. Check it out now.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Latino Vote podcast. It is the middle of June, and this week in Washington, D.C., it's going to be maybe 100 degrees. Hey, Mike Madrid, where in the world are you today?
I am in New York City.
New York City? Sorry, couldn't help myself.
I think that's old school for us guys of our age.
Right.
If you don't understand that reference, let us know. Give us a little bit of a shout out, and we'll post the old commercial.
New York City in the summertime is the only city I could think of that smells worse than Sacramento. But anyway, I digress.
Yeah, I've got this bad track record of going to cities that are just hot and don't smell exactly right. But Sacramento is going through a significant heat wave. So actually, I am in New York City to get out of the heat, ironically enough. And it's been beautiful here the past couple of days. So New York listeners, love your city. Appreciate the hospitality. I'm going to be doing a panel interview with the Alumni Network with Julian Castro. Sat down with, Julian Castro and I, for some reason, just through pure coincidence, have been doing a series of different events together and get along great. I think he's a great mind, is good personality, great temperament, and a real visionary for where things are going. So don't get jealous, Chuck. I do talk to other Democrats too and get along great with them as well. He
where
asked
I come from.
to be.
Well, that's called cheating. It's called cheating where I come from.
He did not ask to be part of the podcast, but he alluded to it a little bit. So we'll probably have him on as a guest.
Which one of them boys is it?
I'm not sure. Does it?
Julian, Joaquin,
right? We got to have them both on at the same time. There's got to be a skit to be done there. Have the Castro boys on.
I love both of them. They're both good friends of mine. Joaquin was a great help. I told Mike this in Thanksgiving when me and Ebony and her mother were in Texas. We went down to San Antonio because they had never seen the Alamo. And just like everybody else, they were like, ooh, I didn't realize it was so small. And I was like, it's just a mission. It was a bigger complex. Anyway, Joaquin was kind enough then to sit down with Ebony and I and have lunch with us. Just like showed up in his T-shirts, just like he does, nonchalant. He is unassuming and gave her a lot of advice about her run for office. And here at the top of the show, we should talk about that. The elections are over in Washington. I didn't talk about it last week because it was actually too close to call. All of you out there, I mainly wanted to come on at the top and thank everybody. A lot of you donated. You got to hear us talk about it. You got to see how involved I had gotten my hands dirty again in a local election. And it's probably the most heartbreaking loss I've had to live through because there were over 12,000 people that voted. And Mike, I'm proud to say that my number was there were going to be 12,000 people that voted. And I pinged it right on the number.
Nice.
And I said that somebody would win with 17 to 20% of the vote. And I thought it would take about 2,500 votes. And currently, as we stand today, the guy who's beating Ebony literally by a couple hundred votes is coming in right under 20% with about 2,500 votes. Ebony's strong behind him at like 2,200 votes at about 19%. And it's just like she did everything to come up just a little bit short. But I think it's important for those of you who followed my Twitter account or my Facebook post, they were the same. It's important, and I've tried to explain this to her, Mike, that a first-time candidate running against literally the entire establishment, she beat 9 other candidates, 3 of which had run before, to come up just short of a guy who was endorsed by pretty much the whole mayor's team, endorsed by the Washington Post, endorsed by the incumbent member, all in the last 3 or 4 weeks, because the whole establishment in D.C. had to come together, consolidate behind one person because Ebony Payne was going to win. And I can prove this, and I'm telling you this long story because only Mike Madrid, who's a professional, would understand this, of a first-time candidate with going against all those other things. She did not have a single endorsement while there were 35 local endorsements by sitting council members, Sierra clubs, unions, business groups all endorsed other candidates. Poor little Ebony got none. And there were $400,000 of outside IE money spent on behalf of other candidates. Ebony Payne had none of that. The average campaign in this race of the top 5 campaigns spent about $160,000 to $180,000 is all each candidate spent because of public financing. So $400,000 in the last 2 weeks for the guy who won, to remind them that the incumbent and the Washington Post had both endorsed him, was quite the hill to overcome. So on election night, just like clockwork, and Mike would probably understand this, is that we were ahead because we had won all of those early votes that had started coming in the first 2 weeks before the Post and the incumbent endorsement. And we started losing votes as those late votes started coming in, where the Washington Post and the incumbent, who is a historic former mayor named Vincent Gray in a district that's 85% African-American, we lost election day big time. So all of that, not big time, but enough to where it was hard to sit and watch her lose a lead because of all of the outside influences that had come in. But I'm super proud of her. I'm super proud of the campaign we ran. Mike Madrid, all of my friends out there, over 1,500 of my friends like Mike gave to her, $50 or less. So I told her she had nothing to hold her head down about, but it's hard to explain that to somebody that you love who probably hadn't mentally prepared to lose an election because she thought because Chuck Rocha was her soon-to-be husband, she was guaranteed a victory. What do you think about all that?
I think I'm really proud of both of you. I want to talk about that a little bit because first I want to thank you too for kind of sharing the experience with our listeners on kind of the guts of what a campaign actually looks like from the inside and kind of walking us through this. I don't think people realize for political consultants how devastating a lot of us can take a loss when our clients lose, because we're given the football. We feel very, very responsible. I've literally had it take a year for me to recover from losing clients that I've been close to, friends, because they're entrusting their life to you, their reputation to you, their future to you, and it's an awesome responsibility. And I just can't imagine how that would be being with somebody that you're about to marry and love. And I appreciate all that you have done here in fighting for her, like the champion that you are. I have not talked to Ebony yet. I want to give her a little bit of space, but I'm hoping to shortly. I'll let you give me the high sign when that's a good phone call to make. But extraordinary effort. Chuck, taking Ebony to coming within a hair's width of becoming a representative for one of the great cities of the world here against the machine. I think everybody saw just a tremendous effort from a real professional and a real gladiator at the profession and the craft. So thanks for sharing it with us. Thanks for the vulnerability, and just really, really proud of you.
And it's interesting because me and you talk about like, oh, I remember this campaign and I remember this campaign. This campaign made me better. Every campaign we've ever run in makes us better. I get to do a lot of privileged stuff and we get to talk about Latino voters. And for the audience out there, I think the reason this podcast is different, that there's a crusty old Democrat and there's a crusty old Republican talking about like what we think we know about everything, but we know a lot. And we don't know a lot because we are scholars in whatever the form of whatever the political thing is. It's because we've been in a lot of races that I was just in and we lost them. And when you lose a race, you probably learn more than when you win a race because there's so many things you could have done differently. I sent that last piece of mail. It was a little negative. It was the only negative piece of mail. I overestimated an endorsement. I stacked the mail early. We didn't have as much mail as I wanted in the last week because I thought an IE would come in for us. It's like, it was again, really, really a way to sharpen steel by hitting steel, by thinking about like what I could do. And I didn't leave out probably the most important part is you think that she had 50,000 people because she had 1,500 donors, but she only had one paid staff. Me and her 83-year-old uncle put up all the yard signs. So between me, her mama, and her 83-year-old uncle, that was pretty much the campaign team, besides a wonderful Solidarity Strategies, who did a bunch of stuff, and a lot of friends who donated lots of materials. But anyway, thanks to everybody for that. And we're going to talk much more about it. One day, maybe we'll have Ebony come on and talk about what it's like to be a first-time candidate running a district that's 85% minority, in like a district that is split a lot east and west on haves and have-nots. But let's talk about Latinos. Let's talk about Latino voters. And Mike Madrid, I know you've been chomping at the bit. Yeah. And just literally couldn't wait to talk about the Biden executive action and the executive order around the border. There's been a lot of press coverage around, is this the right thing to do? Is this a political thing to do? But why don't you first, for listeners who aren't as tuned in as we are, explain to them what the executive order kind of means in a nutshell.
Yeah, so this is, I think this is an extraordinary moment for Latinos, for Biden, for the country. All very positive, by the way. And I know for a lot of people it doesn't feel that way, but I want to spend some time in a bit walking through that. But Chuck asks the right question. What does the executive action do? And essentially, what it does is it allows the president to unilaterally, through executive action, the president, of course, oversees Homeland Security and ICE. He's responsible for enforcement of the borders, to shut down all asylum seekers once that number, people requesting asylum, hits over 2,500 a day, which we have been over for the better part of 18 months a day, 2,500 people coming in and requesting political asylum. Now, political asylum is a very sacred request, and it's something that is very, very central to our American values, and makes us, I believe, a beacon of a shining light, that city on a hill. We are the beacon of the world in large part because we are one of the few, if not the only country that allows this type of process, certainly at the magnitude and scale within which it happens. We value the idea that we are the protector of those fleeing tyrannical government who would otherwise be harmed, jailed, or killed because of their political views. We have made a tacit agreement with our people and the people of the world that if you are in that situation, you can come to America for refuge and seek asylum. And that's a beautiful thing. I think it's one of the most beautiful characteristics of who we are as a society. However, in a time when we have been incapable as a country to develop and execute a plan on comprehensive immigration reform, when there's literally no legal way to get into the country. And when I say no, I mean there's a small, thin goat path of 0.5% of people can actually get in over many, many years. There's no practical way to stand in line and become processed and become a United States citizen. It's inevitable that people will come in and request asylum when the situations that they're fleeing from are more often economic than they are political. And some might call that an abuse. I just say it's inevitable. So having said that, it's one of the main reasons that people talk throughout the world about what the border policy is and how amorphous it may or may not be, how tolerant it may or may not be. And once the word gets out that the asylum process is restricted, you will see immigration flows slow, just naturally on the or on that order. And when the border does cease to allow asylum seekers, you will see the migrant waves start to recede. That will happen. Now, this is very controversial, of course, because it is part of what Donald Trump instituted and executed. And this does reflect a 180-degree turn by President Biden on his own campaign promises, his own campaign words, and perhaps most importantly, the Democratic Party's orthodoxy on these issues. And I want to get to that in a second. But what I also want to say is it's very clear that President Biden is not done. He's going to put forth more executive actions in the coming days and weeks, many of them focused on protecting the undocumented that are already here. And I think that's fantastic because what he's essentially doing is saying we may not be able to get comprehensive reform legislation passed in this country. We have not been able to do anything for 30 years because of the intransigence of both parties. What he's doing is saying, fine, then I'm going to do it by executive action. And it's not going to just be border security. It's going to have some of the elements that folks, right-minded, virtuous folks, Latino advocacy organizations, Latino Democrats who respect and have been fighting for the migrant and the refugee their entire careers, have said has needed to be part of the proposals. I think in the coming days and weeks, you're going to see those folks very elated and very happy with some of the executive action that he takes, rightfully so. He is in a pickle. He's in a pickle because this country and this Congress is incapable of finding common ground. And he's decided, I'm just going to do this by the stroke of a pen, and I'm going to paddle a little to the left, a little to the right. We're going to do something on border security. We're going to start there, but we're also going to do something to protect people and do this humanely, all by executive action. This is extraordinary, and it's necessary. I won't say it's happening out of desperation. When I say desperation, I don't mean out of a bad spot for him. I just mean he's been left no other choice by the Congress, who Republicans don't want to act on this. And they want to act like this is his problem when they're not willing to be part of the help. So he's saying, then fine, then I'll do it. And so he's doing it. And you got to give him credit for that. He was backed into a corner, and he's playing the cards that he's got. And I think he's playing them pretty dang well. So one other quick thing I want to say about this, Chuck, and then, of course, I want to have your opinion on this. One of the reasons that this has been made possible, this is my opinion. I wrote a piece about it in The Atlantic. I'm writing a piece about it in the New York Times. I'm writing a piece about it in the LA Times, all coming out this week because everyone's going, what does this mean? This is only made possible because there's very little discernible difference between Latino voter opinion on this and the overall electorate's opinion on this. CBS News YouGov came out with a poll showing 69% of Latinos supported Biden's action on the asylum change. 70% of the American public supported Biden on the asylum change. 1% difference between Latinos and everybody else. Both commanding majorities, 20 points over 50%, commanding majorities of Americans and Latinos support where the president is going on this bill. And I think this executive action, rather. And I think that is fantastic. I think it's the right decision. Candidly, I think, and I have been saying, this has been the right decision for Democrats to take for many, 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 many years. And the reason why, I want people to understand this, the reason why Democrats have never put forward a proposal on border security is because they thought that would give up all of their leverage in terms of getting a comprehensive immigration reform plan done. And by that, I mean, they felt that if they put specifics down on what a border security bill would mean, that Republicans would take that and then walk away from the other side of it, which was protecting dreamers, protecting migrants here, providing a pathway to citizenship, all of those things that make up a comprehensive plan. And the truth is, they have probably been 100% correct in that assessment until recently. And at this point, I would suggest there was no other option. They had to recognize that posture was a losing posture. And it's not real recently that evidence was clear. It's been clear for many, many years. They were never going to get a comprehensive plan that way. And it became really, really clear when Republicans walked away from their own demands and their own bill because they were negotiating in bad faith. So in many ways, it's kind of like you were right, but you were right that you were wrong. And that's where Democrats found themselves. I think a lot of people felt that they had been painted into a corner. Biden's actions today provide a pathway out for Democrats to be able to win the war on immigration reform, even though I believe very firmly they have surrendered the policy to Republicans on border security. I don't think that's bad. I know there are a lot of people in the Democratic Party. There are a lot of people in Biden's campaign. There are a lot of Latino advocacy organizations. There are a lot of Latino professionals who have made their careers postulating that this was central to Latino identity. I have never believed that. I believe that era is over. I think it's dead. And I think there's a lot of people in the Beltway who I don't want to say have become irrelevant, but have been proven demonstrably wrong in a way that we rarely see in this business. But the Democratic Party has changed. It's changed for the better. It's moving in a direction where Latinos are at. And I think that's good politics. And I think it's good policy, as much as heartbreaking as it is. It's necessary. And I think finally, there's a pathway forward. Sorry about that long exegesis. You can Google that one, Chuck. And long exegesis, long diatribe, long speechifying. But that's my opinion on the issue, on the matter. What do you say? Where are you at on this?
I think it's good. I didn't want to interrupt you because I think that people need to understand what it was all about. They just see the headlines. People don't read newspaper articles anymore. That's why they let you write them, because nobody's reading them. And they put up, that's a joke. I write them too. But nobody's really reading in-depth stuff like we do, and when we do political stuff. So I don't want to talk about the policy. I think that it's, the things I want to talk about is why he did it and what it means. And for folks out there on the left or on the right, like the reason he did this is because there's people around him who said, this is what you need to do to try to help you get reelected. And it's probably the right thing to do on top of that. And this is where the American people are. And so he's not just out here willy-nilly doing things. He's doing things because he's got they're doing tracking polls every single day, I promise you. And this is good politics for him because in every congressional race that I'm working in around the country, and me and Mike have talked about this is the number one issue that they use to beat up Democrats. They're flooding in, it's open borders. And even though it's all a mistake and it's all a lie, they just use that over and over again. And I want to take the listeners back to what Mark Hugo Lopez said on this show several weeks ago, maybe a month ago now, about how the biggest change in the demographic with Latino voters now you have to separate Latino voters from the Latino population, but the biggest difference now from 25 years ago is that the majority of Latino voters now are U.S. born. And the biggest growth in Latino population is third generation Latinos who have become more gentrified, if you will. I don't like that term, and I don't think that that's right, because I think we have Latinized America more so than they've gentrified us. But I do think that it means that folks don't think about immigration the same way that their parents and grandparents thought about immigrations, because the process has just been removed from them. It doesn't, to Mike Madrid's point, it doesn't not make it an emotional issue. And the immigration story is still strong and very relevant for us to use as part of the journey that we've all taken. But I do think that that's why he did it. I think that it's probably going to be a great move for him, but also good policy. And, it's a way to hold Republicans accountable. There has been bills brought up, bipartisan bills, that still, again, nobody will take action on. Instead of doing something, it shows him doing something in the positive. Anytime that a Democrat is doing something to push, I'm in. I hate being reactive to Republicans. Get out there, get in front of something, make a stance. That's why a lot of people like Donald Trump, as stupid as he is, that he gets out there and says all kinds of stuff. But anyway, I'm going on and on now. I'll just say that I think it was the right thing to do. I think he did it for a reason, and I don't think it will hurt him in the general with Latinos at all. Mike?
I think it helps him. I think it's going to center him not just with Americans generally, but I think he begins the process of limiting some of the leakage of a lot of these voters. And I know that that's very anti-conventional wisdom, but I think that's why a lot of listeners tune into this show, is because they want a keener understanding of this. Look, folks, I'm not saying it's a majority, but I'm going to say it's a measurable amount of Hispanics, of Latino voters who are pissed off that the borders are not secure. This demonstrably shows that this president is being reasonable and is going to stop some of these quote unquote abuses at the border. And he's actually doing something. It's going to help him with Latino voters. I would not doubt, nor would I be surprised if in the next 3 or 4 weeks, especially after the next round of executive actions that protect folks that are here and provide that humane element that we're talking about, where his numbers start to come back to earth a little bit with Latino voters. He starts to close or widen that gap with Latino voters. I truly believe that. And I think that there's going to be a lot of people, especially in the Beltway and conventional wisdom, with Latino journalists and academics. I love you all. But this is, a lot of y'all dismiss Mike Madrid's craziness, but this is what the data has always said. This is where our community is at. We may not like it. It may be uncomfortable. It may force some uncomfortable questions, but that's what's happening. And if we're going to claim to make those representations of who we are, we better include this sentiment because, and this is the key point, Chuck started making it a little bit, Bob may disagree on the conclusion, but the Latino electorate is changing. It is changing. It is changing. And change is never easy. It's always difficult for everybody. Just the same way that white Americans are lighting their hair on fire and marching up and down about the great replacement theory and all these Latinos coming in, that change is difficult. Well, you know what? When our own community changes, our own political perspectives change, our own identity and Latinidad changes, that's uncomfortable for a lot of people that have made their bones by saying this is what it is and this is what people believe and this is what they prioritize. That's not the case anymore. The Latino voter for the next 30 years is going to look very, very different than the Latino voter of the last 30 years. And that's part of why we started this podcast, is to walk through those changes, have a discussion about it in real time as it's happening. This, I think, is probably one of the most significant changes that we've experienced when immigration loses its cachet as the defining issue. And I think that's exactly what happened here. That doesn't mean it's not an important issue, doesn't mean it's not a humane issue, doesn't mean it's not an issue that we shouldn't be working on. But what it absolutely does mean is we must recognize that it is not the defining narrative for the fastest growing segment of our community.
I agree. And I got one more thought on this and we'll move on to the primaries is, these issue talking about legalizing, I don't like that word. I like documenting folks who've been here for a long time. Mm-hmm. Both of my business partners in Solidarity Strategies are immigrants. One of them was a DACA recipient, Mike, would still be a DACA recipient today, and he's an equity partner in my firm. He is 34 years old, and he married his high school sweetheart or his college sweetheart just a few years ago. And next week, he is going to do his citizenship test, which is a beautiful thing, right? And so you feel good for him, and he's getting to live that dream, but it's hard, and it costs a lot of money. And it's, you have to do everything just right. So, I think about him during these conversations. I think about another partner in my firm who was born in El Salvador. She got brought here when she was 6 years old. She still works in my firm under TPS. And she's an equity partner in one of the largest Latino-owned political consulting firms in the country. She gets to run congressional races, Mike, but she's still, unquote, undocumented in the Republicans' eyes because she's a TPS recipient from El Salvador. These are the things that people do care about, and where we should be doing something for these folks who came here, like Daisy and Luis, and lots of other immigrants who've worked in our firms and in our lives, right? I think that's the important part. I think you can do both, to your point and to my point, of securing the border, making sure that you have some common sense structures there, but also recognizing that this country is full of people every day trying to make our world better, who quote unquote are undocumented because of some piece of paper in somebody's life, because somebody's mama or daddy, left someplace. One of them left Michoacan and to give their kids a better life in the Central Valley of California. Luis would go on to graduate from Fresno State and grow up, just outside of Tulare. Out there, and Daisy would be in the same area out there. I think about their journeys in their lives as we're talking about these abstract issues around executive actions that are real people's lives. Some of our family's real people's lives. So when me and Mike say that, we should have border security, I like how Mike talks about how we can also figure out how to fix a system that's just freaking broken and been broken for a long time. Talking about systems that's been broken, there's more primaries. We're recording this on a Wednesday, so that means there were a whole bunch of primaries again last night. And Mike, just to give you, because I follow this a lot closer, and you're traveling all over New York and doing your big book tour, probably sitting on golden thrones up there in New York City. But Ohio had a primary. South Carolina had a primary. South Dakota had a primary. I'm going to highlight two things. Nevada had a primary. So two things I'll throw to you for your thoughts on. One is Nancy Mace in South Carolina, who almost single-handedly with a handful of Republicans got rid of your buddy Mike McCarthy. Not Mike McCarthy. What's McCarthy's first name?
Kevin.
Kevin, whatever. All them white boys look the same to me. McCarthy. And so Mace McCarthy and his outside groups spent $3 million to try to beat this woman. He was so mad at her. And this woman who didn't really like Donald Trump a few years ago got endorsed by Donald Trump this time in this race. And not only did she beat McCarthy's handpicked person, they had put a third person in there, almost guaranteeing probably that somebody would have to get to a runoff because nobody would get to 50. Not only did she win last night, but she got over 50%. So she won handily in South Carolina. And then in Nevada, a military veteran Republican named Brown, I think his name is Sam Brown, whitest name in the world. Sam Brown is going to be the Republican nominee against our friend Rosen, Senator Rosen in Nevada, which we're going to talk so much about as we get into the summer. But those are some of the things that are happening. Also, they've picked their Ohio representative to run against Sherrod Brown in Ohio. Don't sleep on the Latino voters in Ohio. Lots and lots. It's one of the fastest growing places where Latinos are growing that we don't talk about enough. But it's kind of like that Eastern Pennsylvania thing. There are these pockets of Latinos outside of Cleveland, Ohio, Youngstown, Ohio, where folks have moved there to work in the tire factories, the Goodyear factories, and the auto plants and the others. So I throw that back to you, Mike, for some of your reaction.
Well, I'm going to start in reverse here because I want to talk about Ohio 6, the 6th congressional district.
Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention that.
Extraordinary development down there. This is a district that Donald Trump won by 30 points. 30. It's a strongly red ruby red district, and the Republican there outspent his opponent by a factor of, I think, about 20-1, maybe more. State senator, politician with huge name recognition. He won by about 4.5 points last night. This
Mike,
is
Mike, before you go on with more numbers, the dude he beat was working in a restaurant 2 months ago. Please go ahead.
And spent a total of $25,000. Like, I mean, it's not even a real campaign at that point. I mean, God bless him. I don't mean to be disparaging, but if you run for Congress while you're waiting tables and spend 25 grand, you're not putting up the challenge that is requisite in a seat like this, which is understandable. It's a Trump plus 30 seat. You shouldn't be throwing money in there if you're a Democrat. But he comes within 4.5 points of beating the Republican candidate. Now, there's going to be a lot of armchair quarterbacking and assessing and analyzing what this means. I'm not sure what it means. I'm going to be honest with you, as somebody who's got an opinion on everything. But what I will say is this: there's no scenario where this is good for the Republicans. None of it is good. It's degrees of bad, right? It's only a question of how bad your analysis of this situation is. I'll give you my immediate top of mind analysis, which is this. I really believe that we are continuing to see a dramatic transformation in the coalitions in both parties, and lower turnout elections are benefiting Democrats in a way that we are not used to. And so if you look at the midterms, if you look at every special election, if you look at all of the primaries since Dobbs, really, where this major shift has been occurring, if you look at the polling differences between Biden and Trump on the ground, the only real through line here is that high propensity, higher educated voters are showing up in their traditional high propensity model habit, and lower propensity voters are not. It's got to be at least a big part of the consideration. And I'm not suggesting that there wasn't tremendous Republican leakage. There had to be. The Republican candidate had to be losing Republican voters. There's no question about that. You can't get to that type of a margin, even in a lower turnout election, without that happening. But both seem to be happening. And I haven't looked at the race close enough to know which was a bigger factor or not, but both of those are significant, and it's clear they're both happening. That alone portends very well for Democrats' chances. Now, does that change in a higher turnout model, like a general election in November? Yes, it does. But I don't know if it changes that much. I mean, my God, that's a big number. And there wasn't a scandal. There wasn't anything nuts going on. It was just a weird, anomalous situation that gave us a clean read of a lot of pissed off, educated, high propensity Republicans who were saying, enough. I've had it with this bullshit. I'm out. I'll vote for the Democratic waiter who hasn't spent any money because he needs that money to survive on tips and he ain't funding his own campaign. And God bless him. So that's that. I mean, what do you think of Ohio 6? I mean, to me, that's probably one of the night's biggest takeaways. I'll talk a little bit more about Nevada and Nancy Mace in a second, but what's your sense of that race?
I just think it's important for people to know that this race is centered in Youngstown, Ohio. It's one of the last. It's a blue collar district. It's lots and lots of steel workers and auto workers live there. So it makes us want to look more at that because I know Mike cares a lot about and likes talking about these kind of voters. I worked in Ohio 6 back in its old days when it was represented by a Democrat named Ted Strickland. Who would go on to be the governor and was a big steelworker guy, former priest, Mike. Ted Strickland was a former Catholic bishop. No, not Catholic. What's the Catholic folks that go around that are a little more liberal? Jebediah, what y'all call them?
Jebediah?
I forgot what y'all call them.
Episcopalian?
No, it's the kind of Catholic.
Like a Jesuit?
Jesuits. Yeah, he was a Jesuit priest. And then he would go on to be Jebediah Jesuit. See, that's kind of close. But Jebediah's. But
Jedi.
That's what I
like a Jedi Knight.
He might have been. He was a Jedi. He was a good guy. And then anyway, that's the district there along the Ohio River. So that's why I want to dig into it more. And I think it does show something. Let me get your last thoughts before we close out this thing on the Mace stuff in South Carolina and Nevada.
Yeah. Big thing is Nancy Mace, big loser. It was Kevin McCarthy by spending that amount of money. He knows better. This is just personal invective. It's completely emotional. And it's not only not helping his cause, he's strengthening his opponents. Spends $3 million against Nancy Mace, dumped a bunch of oppo on her and has just been going nasty on her. People are rallying around her, and he has actually made her stronger. Dollar to a donut, the exact same thing is going to happen with Matt Gaetz in that race down there in Florida. Kevin McCarthy made his mistakes. He should do the classy, honorable thing and walk away from the process, be a gentleman, help his party. He's not capable of doing that. I think he feels just emotionally scarred from what happened, humiliated because of his own ineffectiveness, and he's going to end up spending millions and millions of dollars losing as badly as he did last night while he's trying to seek revenge on all of his enemies. I predict Kevin McCarthy will win 0 of the races where he involves himself in.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I think that as we get towards the summertime here, I think things are starting to come more into vision, to Mike's point, and not just him selling books, which will come into vision too. Y'all should make sure to check out and go look at Mike's book, The Latino Century, and pick it up. He's going to be traveling around the country. I give him a lot of crap because he's in New York City and traveling around. But we also are looking at maybe doing this live broadcasts from the Democratic Convention and the Republican Convention. It's going to be a very big summer coming up. I don't have to worry about running a city council race no more, so I'm going to be a lot more plugged in. But for all of you listening, don't forget to like and subscribe the podcast. Don't forget to call your mama, call your uncles, even call that crazy cousin that likes Donald Trump. Ask them to subscribe to the podcast. They can tell you how much they love to hear my buttery voice and complain about how Mike wants everybody to get off of their lawn. Till next time, it's the Latino Vote Podcast.